we can write computer code, and if we have a mistake or there's some line that doesn't work, we can take the code out and it'll add a new function. It'll cause it to do something new that it didn't do when that line of text was still there. And we can see what
you're taking out a mistake. That's not adding a new function. It's getting a function that it was supposed to have already. It was already supposed to have that function because it would take thousands of lines of code to do that function. And so you found a mistake. So you took out the mistake. You didn't add a new function. You allowed a function already programmed to function. You didn't add a new function. Like taking the brakes off my car does not add a new function where now the car can roll. It already could roll.
Right, so the program couldn't roll, it was broken, and then we removed it, and then it could roll. So it couldn't roll, so it had no rolling function, and we removed the text, and it could roll, so it had a new rolling function. With the function, it can't roll. Without the function, it can.
So if you removed a line of code, let's say you have a computer, let's take PowerPoint as an example, because I'm familiar with that one, and we remove a line of code, can it therefore launch rockets? No. That would be a new function.
Or a copy. It's obvious that you want to believe in evolution, and there may be reasons why. I don't know you at all, but I have in front of me a picture, a copy I made of Charles Darwin's book, page 217, about his confusion about the human eye. This was the first generation copy. I then took the copy and laid that on the copy machine and copied it again. And then I took the copy of the copy and laid it on the copy machine. I kept copying. Instead of off the original, I copied off the copy. There's the 5th generation. You can see the letters start to fade. There's the 10th generation. Much of it is now unreadable. There's the 15th generation. Very little of it is readable. In 15 generations, we went from a text that everybody can read to just about unreadable. Had we kept going, it would have been just a blur of everything. Every animal alive today is a copy off of their parents' genetic code. In the copying process, I don't know of any examples where new information is added. There are scrambled examples of mutations.
I can show you if you want to.
Well, let's do that next time. We got to go here, but if you have 1 or 2 examples, you would need trillions of examples to turn a bacteria into a whale. Trillions and trillions and trillions. Maybe you have 1, I don't know, but I do know that 99.99999% of all observed mutations are detrimental. It's backwards. It's sliding downhill. Now, maybe some people want to believe this, but I want to leave you with this one thought, Stefan.
Back in SpongeBob La La Land.
Yeah, I believe that all the evidence points to the Bible being exactly correct, that the earth cannot be billions of years old, and that man was created instantly, fully mature, and that we've always produced, humans have produced humans and dogs have produced dogs. There are no known exceptions to this. If somebody wants to believe humans and dogs are related, that's certainly that's their privilege, but that's outside of science, observational science. It can't even be extrapolated. The gene code is so wildly different. And I predict there will be a judgment one day, and I'd like to see everybody get ready for that. If you don't know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, I would suggest you start checking. I predict the universe was created by God, and he gave some laws. Don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't commit adultery. I mean, they're spelled out in the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20. And I predict you two guys whom I've never met have broken some of those laws, and I think you're going to be in serious trouble when you stand before the Creator. And you can stick your finger in your ears and, go walking through the minefield if you'd like, but it's going to come back and bite you, and I feel sorry for you.
Evolution means change in allele frequency and population over time. Are the changes limited? You say mutations are part of the engine of evolution. Look at point mutation, inversion mutation. What else is there? Insertion, gene duplication, frame shift, deletions. These are all degrading information. So how do you get rich? By losing money. How do you go from a single-celled organism to a fish to a reptile?
Well, think about this.
Oh.
The United States is the richest country in the world, and it's got the most debt. So what's that say?
Well, sure. I mean, they're printing their own money, but are you telling me that a single-celled organism over enough here? Actually, I want to ask you this. Here's a good analogy, okay? Because it's right in the textbook that I have from school. It shows a picture of a human and a frog sharing a common ancestor. Now, if I told you, okay, now listen closely. If I told you a frog could turn to a prince quickly from a kiss from a princess, you'd say that's a fairy tale, that's crazy. But if I told you that a frog could turn into a prince over enough time over enough change, you call that science? I say both are fairy tales, both are religions. You can believe it all you want, Dave, but it's not science. And you're showing
Well,
this.
yeah, I mean, I'll let you believe whatever you want as well.
You and SpongeBob need to start a college together.
The root of the homo group, which would make sense. How do you know these things are right? See, there's automatically the assumption of some kind of age and a sequence here. This is not science. This is fairy tale stuff. This is repeating a mantra. This is a religion. You have to believe this. It is not established science. Now, guys, let me explain something. If you believe in evolution, these bones they found, these 15 individuals, were dead. Dead. You cannot possibly prove they had any children. None. You couldn't prove they had a single child to them. You certainly couldn't prove they had different children. Now, why are we going to think that some bones in the cave in Africa are able to do something that no human today can do and no monkey today can do, which is produce something other than their kind? Monkeys are producing monkeys, and apes produce apes, and baboons produce baboons. If you know of an exception, I'd like to see it. Because real science is things we can observe, study, test, demonstrate. To find a bone in the dirt and claim it could do something is stupid. It's not science. That's idiotic. Grow up. Come on. Use your little brain.
If we look at, the bottom line, it's the fact that selection only removes the worst deleterious mutations and then amplifies only the best beneficial mutations. So when I talk about these near neutral mutations accumulating in the genome, it's because natural selection, Godless Galaxy, it acts on the phenotype. Okay, so it's either every single nucleotide or none at all. Now, this means that the accumulating damage is largely invisible, say like rust on a car. Now, adaptations, as you were talking about, they actually tend to be highly visible, say like antibiotic resistance. But that means you'd have to present us with, millions of examples of, say, adaptation via beneficial point mutation, duplications, whatever type of mutation you want. You would still be failing to address the key issue in order to make fish to fisherman evolution even plausible. And that key issue would actually be net gain versus net loss. Because like I said, we both agree that adaptation explains fine tuning to an environment. But for one, it doesn't explain how a population, how natural selection is going to select for these near neutral mutations. And secondly, it's not going to explain how natural selection and mutations can actually build the genome, right? I mean, there's a famous population geneticist named Kondrashov. He's actually stated based on, these near neutral mutations, because we're actually accumulating 700 billion mutations per generation. And most of these mutations, if you looked at that chart I had up earlier, they're in the non-selection zone. So what he said was, why are we not dead 100 times over? So the whole point is that there's obviously a shelf life on genomes, which obviously gives us a very long-term problem. And if beneficials cannot counterbalance the deleterious ones, Godless Galaxy, then these low impact mutations continuously accumulate. So for one, this is consistent with biblical creation in the fall, because when Adam and Eve fell and mutations began accumulating in the population, we see this steady decline curve, and it's consistent with biblical creation, but it's inconsistent with pond scum to people evolution, because based on that problem, based on that fact that these population geneticists widely recognize, it's not going to build the genome. It's not going to take your bacteria to biologist. Go ahead, Godless Galaxy.
How big of the population do you think the humans were before the flood or whatever?
Oh, I think you cut out there. If you want to maybe get closer to either your microphone and then repeat your question.
How big do you think the human population was before the flood or whatever?
So
Was it like
before the
large?
flood?
Yeah. Or like before the fall?
I would say that it was a large population, but there would have been a larger population of animals, right? God created 2 humans, but then he created numerous populations of animals, original created kind. So certainly, but it's hard to say exactly what the population of humans were, but they would, at that point, it would have been at least point of genetic entropy. So, the accumulating damage wouldn't be to the point that it is now. Because in the Bible, we read about, people living, Adam lived into the 900s, and we see that steady decline in age. And we can rightly and logically conclude that at least part of it is based on that accumulation or that mutation accumulation problem. And what's interesting is that decay curve, the linear decay curve is consistent with the same curve that we see in the scriptures based on that decrease in age. Go ahead.
Or asks, for Tom, where are your retrodictions on the amount of needed beneficial mutations per year for 3 billion years? No numbers means your theory is not science.
I'd just go with whatever the academic consensus says. Just go ask the biologist. I'm not a biologist.
I'll have something to say to that. See, the thing is, he wants to present, a model of pawns come to people evolution, but he hasn't really explained away any of the fatal blows to his evolutionary theory. And if you look at Haldane's dilemma, which is what somewhat of the question that he's asking, because you would need, let's look at apes to humans. There would need to be tens or even hundreds of millions of beneficial mutations that arose and then went to fixation. And I talked about this during our back and forth, during that time frame, that specific time frame. And that scenario would require roughly 1,000 independent beneficial fixations per generation. And that's literally impossible. Pawns come to people evolution is impossible. And that's why I always say, that type of evolution is outside of just a normal change in allele frequencies and populations over time. It only happens in the minds of the evolutionists. They hope, they dream, they imagine. Immutable, so are you saying that gene duplication, let me ask you a question, okay? I'm gonna ask you 2 separate questions. Can gene duplication add new, novel, and meaningful information to the genome, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, second question. Can gene duplication add new, novel, and meaningful information to the genome?
Yes, that's the same question.
Exactly. So you can duplicate the pre-existing information all you want, but you're not getting anything meaningful.
There are limits to the variation, and they have to already be in the gene code.
I agree completely. So as far as I know, the limits on evolution are, 1, it can only create things that are selected for by the environment. It can't break the laws of physics, and it can't break the laws of logic. Those are essentially the limitations. And as far as I can tell, again, all forms of life are just different combinations of ATCG. So if you have one single-celled organism even that can mutate and have a child who has more survivability, and that mutates and have a child to have even more survivability, which we can observe this in fruit flies and butterflies and rats and mice. We see this happening just with microevolution, where some children have more survivability than others. It seems reasonable, since this more survivability is just a different combination of the ATCG, that we can get the entire diversity of life starting from a single cell with just that ATCG and more levels of survivability. Just like counting 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, we can do to 100. We can't do it to a trillion, but it's reasonable to believe that we can go with this process to a trillion. They seem like to be the exact same thing to me. I don't see the difference.
I really believe you that you don't see the difference. Now that I believe, okay? I wish you would. And all life form is not just CATG, okay? Just like all books in the world are not just ABC. No. They're ABC arranged in a particular order to portray thoughts. There's more to a book than just ink on paper. It's not just ink on paper. It's ink in a particular shape, like the letters of the alphabet, arranged in a particular order, like common sense English sentence structure and paragraph structure, etc. So all of life is not just a simple CATG. It's just not. That is the letters of the alphabet that we write the biological code with, and all the proteins are written with that code.
And the lines of code do have CATG arranged in a particular order. And it's very easy for that to go bad. If you had a computer that could read books, and as soon as it came across a misspelled word, it shut the computer down, shut it down. Okay? That would be similar to mutations happening in this code, CATG, something goes wrong, computer shuts down. Life stops, it dies. And Tom, I don't think I'm going to get you to see this. I think we're wasting our time here. You said you don't believe in a God. You really think this process you're describing can explain how we got here? Is that going to form the world? Is that going to create life to begin with? Is that going to change an amoeba to a whale over trillions of years? You really believe that?
Yeah, I think so. I can think we can see the relation between an amoeba and a whale is the exact same as the relation between you and your cousins and your children and your parents. We can see it in the DNA. We can just do a DNA comparison between you and your parents and see that you both have the same genetic modification that only exists in your family and no one else's family. And we can do the same thing between whales and amoeba or any other species and show they are similarly have a DNA pattern that only exists between that branch of the family tree.
And all of this happened by chance for no reason. What is the purpose of life, Tom? What's going to happen when you die?
I have no idea.
You're not worried about it?
Not really. I think that we can't. Why should I be afraid of something that can't exist at the same time I do by definition?
Okay. If you're happy with that, we'll see you Judgment Day. So you're not worried about what you die because you can't be dead and alive at the same time. Brilliant logic. Brilliant.
Already had to admit that, well, you're not going to admit it, but the freshwater fish would have died as well as saltwater. There's tons, they just wouldn't have. I mean, there's animals that live in water that breathe oxygen that wouldn't have survived, like certain reptiles. The lengths you're going to have to go to try to explain anything with this. And this is what I'm talking about, having to work backwards with religion.
Okay, Scott. Hey, Scott, I don't want people thinking that you're winning the argument. So let me just respond to that a little bit, okay? So the thing is, we wouldn't say every single species went on the ark. Whether every single variation of dog we see came from 2 dogs, that's actually not a problem given what we know about genetic entry, because millions of species, Skylar, in say 6,000 years, we know from genetic calculations that there are tens of millions of DNA differences. Now, if God put those DNA differences into each kind, let's say he encoded that into at the start of their existence, the potential for speciation, Skylar, is mind-boggling. So combined with that fact that species can recover enormous population sizes in very short amounts of time, in addition to the fact, and I think you can agree with this, we now know the vast majority of DNA sequences within a creature, they actually appear to be functional. We're seeing this with the Human Genome Project. So this actually demonstrates that millions of species can come about in a few thousand years based on these DNA differences. So that's actually not a problem with biblical creation. It's actually consistent with biblical creation.
Okay, there are genetic limits, but there are quite a few limits. Would you agree that, let's see, bacteria produce more bacteria?
Yes.
Okay. Are there limits? Can we ever get a bacteria as big as a house, or are they limited?
That's a physical limit.
Okay. Can you ever get a bacteria as big as a whale?
No.
But there are animals as big as a whale, you know, like a whale.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your point?
So somehow the bacteria had to turn into a whale, or over billions or trillions or quadrillions or vigintillion years.
All right. So yeah, I'm losing you again. I didn't hear that last sentence.
You believe you believe something like a bacteria, a single-celled creature, turned into a whale.
They banded together to form colonies.
And turned into a whale, eventually.
Yeah.
And you want this to be taught as science. Wow.
Grandparents human?
Yes.
Okay. Were their grandparents and parents human?
Yes.
How far do you have to go back until they become non-human?
That's a great question.
I don't know, about 200,000 years.
It's not a great question.
I'm not done here, Wills. I'm not done here. Quit butting in. Brenda, if I told you that Mary Poppins could fly rapidly through the air with her umbrella, would that be silly?
Yes, it would be.
What if I told you that she could fly slowly through the air with her umbrella? Does that make it a little more believable and a little more scientific?
Absolutely.
No, it doesn't.
None.
That's the same thing, because you're trying to
No,
tell me 200,000 years ago,
Okay. Wow.
my religion and your religion, kind of like how the gentleman that I was speaking to earlier believes that dogs today came from non-dogs long
Can I
ago and
stop
far
you
away.
right?
He's
I
going
want to
into his
stop you.
religion. He
I
has a
want to-
right to his religion.
I
I have a
want to
right to my
stop you
religion.
right there.
Calling it science,
I want to
that's
stop
the
you right
problem I
there.
have.
I want to stop you right there. You said my religion. What were you referring to?
I'm referring to your belief in molecules to man evolution, abiogenesis.
Okay,
and
we're going to
universal
sort
common
this
descent.
out right now. I am a Christian.
Okay. So you're a Christian.
Dare make assumptions about my religion.
You've adopted a secondary religion.
No,
The religion
it's
of
not.
evolution.
No.
Okay.
I actually take that as very, very insulting.
I take it as insulting when somebody tries to tell me that the idea of us being related to elephants and pine trees sharing a common ancestor, I find that insulting to my intelligence.
Really?
Are you a fan of Kent? Are you a fan of Kent Hovind by any chance?
Love Ken Hovind.
Yeah, when you said the elephants and pine cones, I knew it.
Pine trees.
I knew it.
What pine cones do?
As soon as you said that, I knew it.
Do you believe that pine trees and elephants share a common ancestor?
Yes.
Because they're both eukaryotes?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that's your religion.
No,
Because
it's not.
You can't prove that empirically.
No, it's not my religion.
Pine trees produce pine trees. Elephants produce elephants. That's you can believe they share a common ancestor all you want, but that's.
But this goes back to the.
We look at the empirical data, okay? Well, what do we see? We see that there are marine fossils on mountains and in landlocked areas, obviously that are all far from the sea. We see some sedimentary rock layers that extend over entire continents or even farther. And we also see that the deposition of those layers, they had to have been catastrophic, or else obviously there would not have been much fossilization, because fossilization takes rapid burial. Now, we also see different fossils, and just to name a few, we see fossils of animals giving birth, fish being eaten. I mean, what does this suggest? Sudden and rapid burial. But to actually look at a present day example on how this could have happened and how this could be explained, if we look at the eruption, and you might have heard this being a young Earth creation, if we look at the eruption at Mount St. Helens, that actually demonstrated that sedimentary layers, hundreds of feet thick, could be laid down in hours to days. We also know that canyons can be formed rapidly, and multiple fossilized forests can form as the result of one single volcanic eruption. We also seen through this eruption at Mount St. Helens how coal seams could be produced quickly. So obviously these observations we see, they are in accord with the flood of Noah covering the entire earth a few thousand years ago. So is that consistent with a global flood, or is that consistent with a local flood? And if you say a local flood, how do you explain all that phenomenon? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and this is the last thing I think, because I got to go to bed. But as far as that goes, I'm not really even up on on the geology of it. My field is more like astrophysics, physics. But what I will say is, I couldn't tell you that. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked into this stuff. But from what I do know about the biblical text is that ancient people thought differently than we do, and they had in their mind they had. You ever heard of the term pre-scientific notions and ideas and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's where people ought to look first. Because what you believe about the Bible will shape your view on the world, and I would say the science is probably that's somewhere you probably shouldn't go first. Looking at like ancient Near Eastern cosmology, ancient Near Eastern cosmic geography, stuff like that. You definitely want to get a feel for the text in its proper view. So that's what I would say.
Biochemical adaptations are fine. That's all fine and well and good. You could point to those a billion times. Let me give you an example. You could change the oil in a truck a mazillion times. You'll never turn it into a garbage truck. You could change the chemistry of a bacteria a billion jillion times. Unless you change its structural design, it's never going to become something other than a bacteria. See, and you could change the chemistry of a fish all the times you want to, but unless you change its body plan, you'll never get the land-dwelling creature. The thing for me about mutation is this, Taylor. Mutations are not known to produce structural design change that's novel and retained in the body plan of an organism. And that's what evolution has to be true. That's what must be true if evolution theory were true.
That's just not true. You said mutation doesn't contribute to incremental change.
You just denied evolution theory.
I just showed you.
Unbelievable. I'm out of here, guys. I'm going to sit back and listen. This is crazy. I don't know how to deal with this. You know, how do you deal with somebody who denies their own theory? It's crazy.
That's the position I'm in. Bye.
So, real quick, Matt, did you want to touch on the anti-freeze protein example in the notocrinoid fish?
Incremental change.
Okay, well, if the incremental changes, but that still has to do with mutation, and so are the Linsky experiments, right? I mean, don't they have to do with mutation? If you take these bacteria, what are they expecting out of these evolutionary experiments if it's not mutation based?
They are testing mutations.
So are they hoping that the HOX gene is the mutation cause? Are they trying to mutate that gene particular because that's the anatomical gene that correlates with anatomical changes?
They try all kinds of mutations. What are you getting at?
Oh, no, I was just trying to figure out, like, what would be the main driving force? You would say if it's not genetic mutation, what would be the anatomical adaptation of these not mutation? What would be the driving force then, if not mutation?
Every child is different from its parent, so you're just going to get incremental changes just based on what you guys might call cosmetic changes. Your nose might migrate to the top of your head. If you're swimming in the ocean, that will be selected for.
Taylor, that's exactly what I just told you. And you said no. Now you're telling me yes.
Well, then there must have been some miscommunication.
I don't understand what's going on with you. I just described exactly what evolution theory posits. You said no, and then you turn around and say incremental change about body plans changing, and you talked about the features of the nose moving and migrating and stuff. And it's like, this is how evolution works. That's what I've been telling you. That's what evolution claims.
Well, then there must have been a miscommunication because I accept that.
Evolution posits that structural design changes occur incrementally and build in organisms, ultimately producing fundamentally different types of organisms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if that's true.
That's what the theory posits.
Right, that's right. So what the thing I pointed out to you is that we have no scientific evidence from mutation. The mutation plays a role in such a thing. There isn't any.
If it produces incremental changes that are beneficial, then yeah, and I just showed you one.
But it has to be structural design in nature for it to move an organism towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, you see?
No, chemical changes help the organism adapt.
Wait, are you telling me now that structural design doesn't have to incrementally change for a fish to beget land-dwelling amphibian tetrapods? You're not, because you just agreed with me that's what happens.
Yes, incremental change occurs with mutations but mostly with just what you would call cosmetic changes.
Okay, so I'm pointing out that mutation has not been observed to cause any such effect in living things. It doesn't cause incremental. There's no evidence that mutation has the power to incrementally change the structural design or introduce anything novel that's functional in the structural design. Not the biochemistry, the structural design of an organism, and that's what evolution requires. That's all I'm pointing out for you. Do you comprehend what I'm saying?
So do you deny that antifreeze is an adaptation that is beneficial?
No, I'm not denying that it's an adaptation of some kind, but I'm saying it doesn't affect the structural design of the fish. It doesn't change anything about it, the orientation of its body parts in any increment. It doesn't do anything like that. Okay.
So this is where you've moved the goalpost, because I've proved to you that I can mutate incrementally, and I can have beneficial changes from mutation, and I can get that from loss of information, and I can get that from duplication of information. And so you've moved your goalpost back and back and back, and so now we're at mutation doesn't have any effect on structural function of the organism.
No,
I'll come back to you with a paper that shows mutations that will lengthen bones or something.
Well, the thing is, here's the issue here is
it's not a structural design change.
And just
predicted by the theory of evolution.
See, the thing is, all these examples of adaptation, because nobody disagrees with adaptation, it's important. Natural selection is very important in fine-tuning a species. It keeps species as strong as they can be, but a lot of evolutionists will say, based on these beneficial mutations that are deleterious in one environment and not so deleterious in another, they'll say, you know, there's a trade-off. You know, that's how you're going to get your fish to fisherman. But the problem is, Taylor, is that while the genome is degenerating, and while a few nucleotide sites may be improving based on this adaptation, based on a few rare beneficial mutations, huge, massive numbers are being degraded. So this type of trade-off is obviously not sustainable. And that's what us young Earth creationists recognize, as it will result in a shrinking functional genome size. And that's even what Lenski himself has demonstrated in this E. coli experiment, 40,000 generations of E. coli bacteria. He's proven that bacteria produce bacteria, for one. He's also proven that large numbers of adaptation result due to reductive evolution and a shrinking functional genome size. So basically, you're just throwing out lots of information from lots of nucleotide sites, and then you're trying to replace all that information with a single desirable beneficial mutation, whether it's duplication, point mutation. So the whole point and everything Neff's trying to get at is that these beneficials are reductive and things are not being taken forward because they're still degrading no matter what. And that's a fact.
Based on what scientific evidence? What papers? Because all the ones that you cited, they all show that that only happens below a certain population threshold and not above.
They didn't show that. They're making assumptions. They don't show any such thing.
Then why would you cite them?
No, they don't show that any kind of mechanism is able to prevent the vast majority of mutations from being endlessly fixed in the population. They don't show that. They have
the conclusion of the study.
They have models that they imagine in their head, Taylor, that they think could work over time, but they're not demonstrable. They don't demonstrate any such thing. These are ideas. They're not observed, tested, and repeated.
Let's talk about Mendel's accountant as a model that's in someone's head then.
Today.org, you want to get the Dr. Jack Cawazzo's book if you want all about the Neanderthals. Big size of the brain does not indicate intelligence. Okay, let's see. Small brain. I wonder if it was small enough they could believe they came from a rock. I don't know if there's any monkeys dumb enough to believe they came from a rock. You give them a rock and they don't even respect it like their elders at all. I mean, they throw it and, pee on it and everything else. Okay.
But that's a really, really good point you made, Neff. I just want the audience to understand. I just want to use an analogy real quick and maybe help Taylor understand too, because like you said, natural selection acts upon the phenotype, not the genotype. So it's either every single nucleotide or none at all. It has to be the entire organism. So picture a room full of people. Now kill off the most mutant people. Now what do we have? We have a room full of people who still have, based on a mutation accumulation, 60 to 100 more mutations than their parents. So that means, Taylor, if everybody is multiply mutant, and if every generation is more mutant than the one before it, all this selection can do is slow down the degeneration by killing off the absolute worst of the lot. But it doesn't stop mutations from accumulating in the population over time. And that's why things are going down, not up. And that's why all evolutionists can actually provide, based on the fact that natural selection acts on the phenotype and not the genotype, are rescue devices that can slow down the degeneration, but nothing can stop it. And that's what us creationists look to. And that's why us creationists can't understand why evolutionists won't accept this fact.
Well said.
I'm going to use small words so the other atheists who are watching can understand what I'm saying here. No fossils could possibly count as evidence for evolution. Number 2, bones in the dirt indicate something died. Number 3, bones can't talk. Number 4, they don't have a date stamped on them or come with a plaque telling their story. Number 5, someone is putting their interpretation on these bones to tell what happened to them. No plant or animal today can produce anything other than its kind, as you mentioned in your speech. No animal has been observed producing anything other than its kind. And you can use the word species if you'd like. It's never been observed. Number 7, why should we think bones found in the dirt could do something that no animal today could possibly do? Why could it happen long ago and far away and can't happen today? Number 8, who would each of these millions of so-called transitional species marry? They have to have another one evolving similar and be able to pass on this new genetic structure. Number 9, if there was a new and improved animal, wouldn't all the rest of the old variety have to die to make this really work, or else they get swamped back into the population? Number 10, there is no proof that any of the bones they found in the dirt had any offspring. That's why no fossil would count in a court of law as evidence for anything in an honest court of law, if they exist. All you know is it died. You couldn't prove it had any children. Number 12, the offspring of this new species would face the same, or they certainly couldn't prove, number 11, couldn't prove they had any kids that lived. Even if you could somehow prove they had kids at all, you couldn't prove those kids lived long enough to produce another generation. You couldn't prove such a thing. The offspring of this new species would face the same problems of finding a mate and wiping out the old population. So let me get back to where I was here, right there. Okay. I would point out, I do believe in scientific evidence. I love studying science. It's the inference that I'm confused, that why you would come to the inference that you do. The evidence points to the fact that animals and plants always produce the same kind of offspring, as you so eloquently said. I agree. That's all anybody has ever observed. And that's what real science is. Inference may or may not be correct, as we saw with John Coffey and the Green Mile movie, and 1,000 other things happen through history where someone makes the false inference from the facts.
Good question, brother. One last question.
So you believe in Noah's Ark, and there is a certain number of kinds on Noah's Ark. I'd guess probably around 7,000, just to throw a number out. And right now, there's currently about 6.5 million species of animals that live on land. That means that approximately 4 species would have to be created every single day. Which, by species, I just mean about like several 100,000 differences in the genetic code. So is that an accurate representation of your theory, that you believe that there are a certain number of kinds on the Ark, like 7,000, and there's currently about 6.5 million estimated species? So that would mean that
are you asking me how can you get that amount of species in 4,000 years?
Right, because there'd have to be at least like 10,000 differences per day.
Yeah, I actually, that was a big portion of my opening with the created heterozygosity hypothesis. If you've got these heterozygous ancestors that God encoded with these pre-existing functional DNA differences, because we know there's millions and millions of DNA differences, nuclear DNA differences that separate species and families. So if those are encoded by God at the start of their existence, an almost limitless variety of combinations of chromosomes, genes, and traits are actually possible. So when you look to that model, we don't just look to mutations there, Tom. We look to recombination, gene conversion. They're going to provide many new varieties of these combinations of traits that I'm talking about quickly, since the differences are already built in. So it makes testable, falsifiable predictions that I've talked about earlier.
My question was a little bit different. I was asking because in order to account for those species, you would need to have 4 new species every day. And a new species, I'm simply just defining as something that has hundreds of thousands of genetic differences, which means in order to account for these new species, you need hundreds of thousands of differences every day. Your theory seems to have a much greater evolution than ours.
I just don't think you understand what I mean by built-in genetic differences. There's millions of DNA differences in the nuclear DNA. So if these were built in at creation, created heterozygosity hypothesis, obviously through recombination and gene conversion, these new traits, new species would come about quickly, especially post-creation, immediate post-creation, post-flood.
I think you're saying that it's pre-programmed, that the species are pre-programmed into the DNA?
The genetic diversity is pre-programmed. Actually, there's a paper out. I would recommend you look at it. It's a fulfilled prediction from, based on the created heterozygosity hypothesis. It's about finches, because we predict shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity, right? Heterozygous DNA sites to more homozygous DNA sites would produce new species quickly, even in observed time. So we've seen just recently, observed time, new finch species came about through shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. So because we've just studied speciation and speciation events recently, the more that we do study, that's another testable prediction. There's going to be more observed cases like these finches, many more. But the thing is, it has slowed down since the flood. So there's certain rates, mutation rates, predictions have been made. I would just tell people to read Replacing Darwin, very, very complex technical book, but it's all there. It's very fascinating.
But the DNA code is so complicated that even a 1,000th of 1% difference could be fatal, a change from the DNA. And again, I would point out the similar DNA probably proves a common designer, not a common ancestor. I think if you look at all the writings of Edgar Allan Poe, you would find thousands of similarities. Yes, that's coming from the same mind, perverted and twisted as it was. It's coming from the same mind. That's why, the Telltale Heart has some similarities to his other writings. Okay, well, that's the fact that there are similarities in DNA and even maybe retroviruses, some kind of weakness in the system that allows this to happen, could be, again, from the same designer. It is not evidence. What happens in colleges typically, Jackson, the teacher will impress the students by listing off 20 or 30 or 40 evidences for evolution. Each one on its own will not stand up to scrutiny. Every single one can be refuted easily, which is why when you started naming off all the branches of science that support evolution, embryology, etc., I said, whoa, take these one at a time. No, they don't. But somebody convinced you somewhere along the line that all these similarities and all these branches of science all point to the same thing, and they don't. You're being lied to. You need to get your money back for this degree. So the phylogenetic, there's no phylogenetic tree. It's an orchard. All of the foxes, wolves, coyotes, dogs probably had a common ancestor. That would be one tree, a phylogenetic tree. All of the apples, and there are 2,000 different species of apples now, they might have had a common ancestor, and it was an apple. That does not prove apples and dogs are related. It's a completely different tree. There are 5 different varieties, or species actually, 5 species of giraffe. They might have had a common ancestor, and it was a giraffe. There are 8 kinds of bears in the world, black bear, grizzly bear, panda bear, etc. They probably had a common ancestor, and it was a bear. What we observe in nature and in reality and in science, and even in the laboratory, what we observe is everything produces after the same kind. And people would recognize a grizzly bear and black bear and brown bear and panda bear as a bear. It's the same kind of animal. Now, there's lots of differences. And so the Chihuahua and the Great Dane are pretty different. But they're both recognizable to a 5-year-old as being a dog. They're in the same family. I don't know that our current classification system, developed by Carolus Linnaeus, matches God's classification system of kind. It probably doesn't at all places, but I would say somewhere around the family level would probably be better than the species level. So what you're going to do in school, Jackson, they're going to show you a bunch of examples of new species, like there's now, I think, 80 or maybe 100 species of ladybugs, based on the number of spots and the position of the spots and the length of the legs. And somebody got a government grant to study all this, I'm sure. And, okay, there's still a bug. It's a ladybug. That's not evolution. It's not going to even help the evolution theory.
Kinds of created plants there were, or kinds of created fish. That would be a different story. But let's start with the working hypothesis that there are original 7,000 created kinds. They have now diversified into millions of species. I agree. Speciation happens. I do not think that's any evidence for evolution. I think the speciation is always limited, very limited, in many ways. And I don't think there's any way Aron's going to come up with any answer to how we get new information. For instance, this single-celled creature that develops a colony and has a digestive tract now has to develop wings and the ability to fly. This is adding information that they're just. I'd love to hear his answer. Where does the additional information for this cell come from, or this cluster of cells, to learn to fly, to learn to reproduce, to learn to eat, to learn to seek out food, to learn to avoid, unpleasant conditions, be it temperature or sunlight or whatever? There are thousands of features that today's animals have. Obviously, the ability to move about, to seek a mate, to seek food, to ingest and digest food, and this had to come from a single cell. Where it looks to me like additional information is being added. Where does this come from? Which is, I think, another giant problem for those who believe, capital B, believe in evolution.
I'm guessing by the space that I'm allowed to speak again.
Oh, sure, yeah, please do, yes.
Okay, so you said that what you proposed just now, which again is you just expressed how you don't understand what you're talking about, but everybody listening to this has gathered that much by now.
Oh, okay.
You said that this would be what you propose is a working hypothesis. In what actually makes it either working or a hypothesis? What experiment could we use to vindicate this idea if it were true, or falsify it if it is not?
Okay, let's see if we can cross an elephant and a pine tree. Let's get the sperm or egg of an elephant and the pollen from a pine tree and see if we can get them to produce something. Or let's look at let's see, can they, the Bible says they will bring forth after their kind. If we start with 7,000 kinds of animals, can we get them to interbreed? You think it's possible for a bat to interbreed with a bird?
Are you saying that God created a first pair of bats and also created a first pair of birds? Is that your answer to my question?
I don't know how many first pairs of birds there were. Maybe there were 50 pairs.
Okay, so that is not an answer to my question then.
I am answering your question.
But you're answering that you do not have an answer is literally what your answer is. You don't have the answer.
My answer.
So I appreciate, I admire your faith, but I do not admire your science. That you're imagining that these little variations that we see are going to somehow, somewhere add up to something else. It just doesn't happen. It's never been observed. So adding time is not going to help. Over time, species go extinct. There are no examples of new information being added that is productive to anything. All known mutations are harmful, fatal, or neutral. And if you did somehow, somewhere, get one positive mutation, who's it going to marry? This has to happen twice in the same place, in the opposite sex, and they got to find each other and be interested, or it gets diluted back down. It is just simply nonsense, non-science and nonsense to believe that all life forms are related to a common ancestor. Though I love America, this is the land of the free and the home of the slave. You can certainly have your own religion. That I don't mind. But I do resent you forcing all of us to pay for that in the schools and calling it science when it's clearly not. It is science to say dogs produce dogs. It is not science to say dogs and whales are related. It is pure imagination, SpongeBob stuff.
Correct your idiocy.
The evolutionists claimed for 35 years it was junk. Now it's even known some portions of it code for proteins. It's not junk. Some of it is fundamentally necessary for the development of human organs, like the placenta and the liver. That's not junk.
Yeah, junk DNA is a term made up by the media who report on science. So I'll read you
it's made up by an evolutionist scientist.
All right. So I'll read you what actual scientists say about this. They say it remains unclear whether or not the bulk of these DNA sequences have an important functional role. So we just say we don't know until we can prove it.
But that's not what they've been saying for 35 years. So.
Sorry, you were saying?
Sure, some people will take that and run with it and say junk DNA. We don't know what it does, therefore it does nothing. But that's an unscientific position.
That's not what Taylor. That's not the case. Let me make it clear. For 35 years, evolutionist scientists an evolutionist scientist invented the term Ono. I think it was, invented the term DNA. It's been, and they've been saying for 35 years that it is junk. Not just that they don't know what it does. They've been saying it's junk. It's garbage left over by evolution. That is exactly what they've been saying. So what you said is wrong. You've misrepresented the facts.
And I just want to say it's hilarious too, because P.Z. Myers himself said the genome is mostly dead transcriptionally. The junk is still junk. And Richard Dawkins said it's a remarkable fact that the greater part of the genome might as well not be there for all the difference it makes. Now, it is true that evolutionists did say maybe some of it has some unknown function, but the vast majority of it is still non-functional. I mean, from what I've heard from talking to evolutionary scientists, they'll say maximum 20% functional. So what does that say? They're saying 80% at least is non-functional based on evolutionary leftovers. Are you denying that, Taylor?
What they're talking about is non-coding.
I know, yes. Non-coding DNA, but are you denying the fact that the evolutionists are saying that maximum the non-coding regions are 20% functional? Are you denying that?
They're not saying maximum. They're saying it remains unclear what the bulk of the DNA does. But they're saying that they can only confirm about 20%.
Right, but they've been saying for 35 years that it's junk and has no function.
But the original prediction was that the DNA is idle. That was they were so sure in 2001 that 98 or 99% of the genome is junk. They were so sure, and right now they are so sure of a new figure. So how many times are they going to be so sure?
It's regulatory information, so it has a lot more anti-fragility than the non-coding or the coding region of the DNA. So they have performed experiments of knockout genes, and it doesn't affect it as much, but that doesn't prove that it has no function.
Well, yes, it's exactly right, especially with all the redundancy. But do you know how many gene knockout tests have actually been performed on mammals, for example?
Not nearly enough to cover the genome.
Exactly. So, for one, it's premature for an evolutionist to say that, max 20% of the genome is functional. But the thing is, the evolutionists are not the ones making the prediction that the vast majority of our genome is functional. We are, based on the hypothesis of created genetic diversity, created functional DNA differences. And these pseudogenes that are supposedly genomic fossils, evolutionary leftovers from past common ancestors, we now know that these pseudogenes, these specific genes, they're necessary. They're required to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. There's also areas in the non-coding DNA regions that are extremely important in placental development, embryonic development. So if an evolutionist is going to say that, these functions are based on evolutionary leftovers, genomic fossils, I mean, that's a huge stretch of the imagination. That's more consistent with a model of pre-existing genetic built-in created diversity. I mean, it just seems like a stretch of the imagination to me.
Now, the reason the evolutionists said for 35 years that the majority of the DNA molecule was junk is because it didn't code for proteins. And their belief system was, if it doesn't code for proteins, it has no function. This was the early years of genetic understanding. If it doesn't code for a protein or an RNA, it doesn't have function. They had not observed in the vast majority of the DNA to do either. And so they assumed, well, it's junk, it's garbled, it's attached to the DNA molecule, and natural selection hasn't somehow just deleted all that junk, but it's functionless. And that's why they believed it was functionless, because they had not observed it to code for proteins or RNA. But now, here we are 35 years later, and we know, wow, all kinds of functions being discovered in this information, and critical information that helps develop fetally the liver, the pancreas, the placenta, and other things too. And some of it actually codes for protein, a small percentage of it, and the vast majority of it is codes for RNA. So the creationist scientists in the early 1980s who said, wait a minute, you might call it junk, but science, as it advances, is going to discover that all this DNA that you think is junk is going to actually be discovered to be critically important information that makes a human being. And that prediction was correct. Because now we know 87%, or is it 97% of the DNA, I think it's 87% of the DNA molecule is known to code for RNA, and that number is expected to rise possibly as much as almost, if not 100%. So the creationist prediction, you say, we hear evolutionists all the time say creationism doesn't provide any the scientifically verifiable predictions. That's one. There's one in the Bible where it says creatures will be begat after their kind. That's verified. The fossil record shows us that's exactly what happens. Animal husbandry for the last 5,000 years with mankind breeding all kinds of creatures has shown that's exactly what happens. Creatures beget after their kind, just like the Bible said. That creation prediction is verified. The creationists predicted that random genetic mutations in general would have a negative effect on living things. Evolutionists said that's not true. The creationist prediction has been verified in the last 25, 35 years of genetic studies. So
that's not really a prediction, because all you did there is correctly point out that you shouldn't just assume something has no function just because you can't find it. And that is a correct position, but it's not a prediction. Just saying there could be a function is not a prediction, because you haven't applied.
Well, we never said there could be a function.
No,
They
they
will be a
didn't.
function.
That's right. They said it was a prediction. That's incorrect.
There's nothing to cry about, okay? Pieced together from fragmentary evidence, I've been able to reconstruct the evolution of silverware. You can see these two spoons here. Obviously, one's been subjected to more geologic pressure and has squished it out a little deeper than the other. I believe knives slowly turned into spoons over millions of years, and then gradually erosion cut grooves into the end and turned them into short-tined forks. Then very slowly, of course, takes a long time, the forks got, the grooves got deeper and longer. I knew I had the right order. You can obviously tell that, but I just felt like I had a missing link. One day I was flying to Connecticut on US Air, and the stewardess handed me the missing link. I don't think she knew what she had, but my trained scientific eye caught it right away. Later I went to Popeye's Chicken. I now have two. So, the evolution of silverware is nearly complete. Of course, many mutants didn't survive over the years. And once people realized I was doing studies on the evolution of the fork, they started sending me research, hoping to become famous, People get desperate for fame in this field. This is a cutthroat business, okay? We're hoping for fame and fortune. They sent me an obvious fraud. This is a fork head on a spoon handle. I caught it right away. I said, no, I'm sorry, this is unacceptable. This is a fraud, okay? Of course, how the race has evolved is still a question we're studying. But look, arranging things in order doesn't prove a thing. You can arrange words in order, turn a cat to a cot to a dot to a dog, changing one letter at a time. It doesn't prove a cat and a dog are related. You can play around long enough, turn yourself into a fool with this, okay? That's what your religion's been doing for the last 70 years.